Food security is foundational to national, regional, hemispheric, and global security. When countries and regions are food secure, they are far more likely to be productive, stable, and prosperous. So maintaining food security should be treated as a strategic imperative across the Americas. The Western Hemisphere is a global food powerhouse, with advanced agricultural technologies, high production capacity, and major staple crop producers and exporters like the United States, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, and Argentina. The region plays a vital role in global food supply. Many smaller countries also contribute, especially through fruit and vegetable exports. But this system is neither perfect nor self-perpetuating. In the last several years, food prices across the Americas and the world have been increasing due to global shocks, such as the war in Ukraine, which have strained household food budgets. Ecological threats, including extreme heat, floods, drought, and biodiversity loss also pose risks to agricultural productivity in the hemisphere's most fertile regions. Trade historically has ensured affordable food within the hemisphere and beyond, especially during major crises like drought, war, and price spikes. Unfortunately, today's rising trade frictions threaten the smooth functioning of this system. Welcome to this episode of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security's The Future of Food in the Americas series. My name is Peter Engelke, and I am a senior fellow with the Geostrategy Initiative in the Scowcroft Center, where I lead the Atlantic Council's foresight work. My team and I identify and assess the driving forces of change in the world today that will shape the world of tomorrow. For this episode, I spoke with Dr. Claudia Ringler, who is the Unit Director of Natural Resources and Resilience in the Transformation Strategies Department at the International Food Policy Research Institute. Dr. Ringler is a highly respected scholar who conducts research at the intersection of nature, agriculture, and development for tangible progress toward more equitable and resilient food systems. Let me begin with maybe a most basic question that I can think of about this topic. So in your role as an executive at IFPRI, which is a prominent agriculture and food research organization, how do you define food security?
So we typically at the International Food Policy Research Institute, and I think globally, use the food security definition from the 1996 FAO organized World Food Forum. That talks about food security existing, I think, when all people have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food at all times. And I think the definition goes on to say that this food security then allows people to lead healthy and productive lives. So it's a pretty, I think it's a pretty all-encompassing definition. I think what has changed in the decades since then, there has been a bit more of a separation of nutrition from food security. So the food security definition already included nutrition, but now we often separately talk about nutrition and about diet and diet-related diseases and challenges and the cost of a healthy diet. So those are all terminologies that have come up much later. So just in the last 2 decades or so, or decade. And the most recent term has also further developed food security, to an analysis of food systems. So, for example, if you live in a food desert, let's say in a rural area where you have no access to stores that provide, let's say, fresh vegetables or fruits, you might, be surrounded by crop fields, but you might still be food insecure, or at least you might not have access to what is needed for healthy diets.
We know that the Western Hemisphere's role in the global food system is critical, very important, and we would love to get your take on that. So what is that role, and what is the primary contribution made by the Americas within that global food system?
I mean, the Americas are the agriculture production powerhouse of the world, kind of the lung, in part, talking about the lung, in part because of this rich water and land resources that are available in that region compared to the domestic populations, and also just compared to the land size of these countries. So that, and I guess one additional factor that's also driving these agricultural powerhouses are investments in agriculture R&D. So the Congo Basin also has very rich water resources and some rich land resources, but it's obviously has not developed into this kind of agriculture and production powerhouse. So the other piece that the Americans have brought into the puzzle is large, consistent, and just, I think, advanced agriculture R&D investments, large research systems, for example, in Brapa in Brazil, that have really turned around the yields that, for example, Brazil has achieved, and also just advanced the way food is produced in that region.
And when it comes to global food security, of those challenges that you just mentioned, what in your mind are the greatest risks to the ongoing role that you've outlined for the Americas within the global food system? In other words, what are the most significant in your mind in terms of level of risk and why?
The greatest risk that I can see is certainly climate change, and climate change as expressing itself in longer dry spells, hotter temperatures, the drying of the Amazon. So I think it's a particularly large challenge, or the largest challenge, because many other challenges that the region faces can be addressed through investment, changes in cropping patterns and so forth. But these increasing temperatures and the drying of this powerhouse, and it's not easily reversible, and it's not easily addressable. There's other shorter term challenges such as tariffs and changes in investments in agricultural research, changes in partnerships, exchanges. So all of that is also affecting, I think, the productivity and obviously production potential. But the climate change one is probably the largest, followed actually by biodiversity loss, because this biodiversity is simply essential. It's the essential source for future agricultural production growth, and it's also it's the underlying fabric on which agroecosystems thrive.
Yeah, and of course those two things are very much linked, aren't they? The changing climate with threats to the biodiversity and the sort of biological endowment of the Americas, which is extraordinary. So let's stay on this topic for a moment and talk a little bit about what we might do about that. So we know that everywhere in the world, including the Americas, as you just described, we've got hotter temperatures, we've got changing precipitation patterns, which manifests itself in all sorts of ways, drought included. How difficult is it proving to be to adapt the various agri-food systems in the Western Hemisphere to these new climate realities? And if you might talk a bit about the biggest challenges in doing that in real time, frankly, because we're living through this right now.
Yeah, real time, exactly. So, I mean, what it does, it requires ingenuity. So it means continued innovation and also investments and collaboration. I think those are, some of the key interventions that have made a difference in the past and are needed to ensure that the Western Hemisphere remains, as you said, a set of key breadbaskets for the world. There's also new varieties that obviously in Brapa and other agricultural research systems are developing. The CGR, where IFPRI is a member of, is of course also there helping to develop drought and heat stress tolerant varieties that allow farmers to still achieve the same yields that they had before, when the climate was not quite as variable, or especially not as hot, and the dry spells were not as long. So this kind of investment, I think is a key source for allowing this region and the countries to continue to see agricultural production growth. In the Americas, of course, it's not just public agriculture investments, but we also have a very strong grounding and a very strong private sector, especially for maize or corn, that has been essential for driving production growth through this introduction. So it's both advanced seed technologies, more irrigation, but obviously carefully developed irrigation, because while the region is endowed with incredible water resources, they're also under threat, and this introduction of ecological approaches. I think those are kind of the thrusts that are currently, as you said, happening in real time. And so, the region certainly doesn't sit back and wait for doom to come. Innovation is ongoing, and that's essential.
What are the challenges for, say, on the one hand, the key producers, which would be farmers, to adapting to all of this, whether stresses of various kind. And then on the other hand would be the rest of us, which would be the consumers and the people across the Americas who consume food, obviously. So in your mind, if you just might take us through a little bit on how these groups have to adapt when these shocks arise.
Well, we are all depending on the food that's produced by farmers. Farmers live, they live these shocks. And I think, again, we formulated it perfectly. It's a range of shocks, right? So we have the climate risks that are there and changing. And we also have, input price risks. So these input prices, let's say fertilizer, diesel, or whatever it is for machinery. Even the cost of machinery changes, right? Because it's an integrated international system where some of these machinery comes from. Right now, we are seeing a lot of movements across all of those components. So I think farmers have to constantly adjust, when they plant, what inputs they actually have access to. For example, what has been happening, not necessarily because of a changing climate, but simply because rapidly growing populations and increased demand for irrigation. So water resources have become scarcer and scarcer for irrigation. Cities have developed in the American West, and they need also a lot of water resources. Sure. So farms are being, bought out, or there's some deals that farmers convert from irrigation into dryland agriculture, which is of course a challenging proposition. And so irrigated area in the United States has actually declined because a lot of it was in the Midwest. That's also tends to be the region where people want to move to for retirement or whatever reason. And so that also has changed the agricultural production risks of farming. And so some irrigation has moved eastwards, also because it's becoming drier there slowly. But that changes the opportunities that farmers have.
I guess the positive question would be, how can we do better collectively? In other words, how can governments, the private sector, civil society actors of various kinds, at all levels, from subnational to national to sort of international levels, work together to ensure that we have sustainable and resilient agri-food systems across the Americas? In your mind, is there a solution set there that is an improvement upon what we're doing already?
Food security tends to be a core, government responsibility, and that means food security at the national level is a comparison how much you produce and how much you import, and you're trying to get this equation right, and you can actually only get the equation right if you do some cross subsidizing, so taxing the people who have more than enough food, and then use those resources to provide access to food to those who live in food deserts or simply can't afford food because they don't generate enough income. So that's the government job, to then be able to balance the food import and export equation correctly. That's where we need that's where we need engagement across countries. And there are a lot of forum where countries come together. The Americans have generally their own conferences of ministers of agriculture, also ministers of water resources. There's also G20 and various other fora where they can come together and and basically have discussions around frameworks that support everyone. By having this exchange of commodities, but obviously also exchange of knowledge, exchange of students, exchange of technologies, learning from mistakes, but also learning from successes. That's when all countries can be lifted up and improve local, national, and global food security. At the local level, I think since the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen a lot of activism and a lot of activities from community food banks. Again, that used to be considered a government job to run a food bank for people who cannot afford food. Now, I think they're often run by communities themselves. There's a lot of these community local gardens, school gardens. I think there's a lot of now community activism to try to make up for some of the the gaps that that have become increasingly apparent in terms of achieving local food security and food security in areas where poorer people are concentrated. I think there's a lot where exchange, collaboration, joint investment can really pay large food security dividends.
Claudia, I'd like to thank you so much for sitting down with us today to talk through this critical set of questions. We very much appreciate it. This conversation is just the beginning. Join us for upcoming episodes as we dive deeper into the future of food in the Americas. And for more on our work, please visit the Atlantic Council's website.